Welcome to Community Chat. I'm Tenickia, your host. And today we have a special guest who will share her story of domestic violence to help us build an abuser profile. It's our hope that from hearing the testimony of our guest, Amanda Tenorio, all of us, viewers, myself included, can learn some common traits of an abuser. Okay, welcome, Amanda.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Good. I'm familiar with your story, of course. Can you just share some of what happened with you with our viewers?
Sure. When I met my abuser, I was going through a very bitter divorce. I had separated from my husband, who I had 2 children with. So I was already sort of in that vulnerable stage that I didn't know about at the time. My ex-husband was very emotionally and psychologically abusive, but never any physical abuse. And at the time I was struggling to work and really take care of my kids on my own. I was in a new area, had no support, no family, no community supports, no friends, so very isolated already. And that's when I met my abuser.
Okay. And so how did you meet him, or how did the relationship begin?
The relationship started actually, we ran into each other at a gas station, and he was promoting his business. At the time I was in sales, so I thought it was, a little bit of a networking opportunity. I couldn't tell at the time that he was sort of grooming me for something. And then very quickly we got into this relationship, and it was a whirlwind. I didn't even realize what his expectations were. I thought, okay, we're casually dating, but his perception of it was we were very much committed.
Wow. Okay. And so when did it turn from, the nice dating to the abuse?
Very quickly. I had maybe about 3 months of good times with him. By the 3rd month was when things really shifted. I noticed a big difference in him he probably was this way all along, but he was very good at hiding it. It started with him being very controlling. He had a lot of jealousy just out of nowhere, was very insecure. And then from there, it just slowly escalated. It'd be slaps in the face when we'd get into an argument. Then it went up to pinning me against the wall, strangling me, and then pulling me around by my hair, dragging me no matter how small or large the argument was, whatever it was about, things kept escalating. And I emotionally was pulling away from him, and that's when he increased his abusive behaviors towards me.
Wow. Yeah, all of what you said so casually. But that's a lot. That's a lot for a person to endure from someone whom I'm assuming you thought you loved one another, and yeah.
Yeah, it's very quickly to think that you're falling in love with someone, but he really was my knight in shining armor when we met. He rescued me. He did everything that I wanted my husband to do. He was painting that beautiful picture for me. So, and like I said, I was already very beaten down emotionally. So it was easy to look at him as the perfect person and say, this is what I wanted all along. And he knew how to portray himself that way to me. Once the violence kept escalating, it turned into him raping me, beating me with different weapons, whatever he could get his hands on. Ultimately, the final episode was him holding me and my son hostage for 2 weeks. And that was my breaking point.
Wow. And all of this took place in what time span?
This took place over 8 months.
Wow.
We were together a total of 14 months. So, the really bad physical assault was 4 months into our relationship, and then it took me about another 9 months to get away.
Wow. And how did you get away?
Like I said, he had held my son and I hostage after beating us, well, mostly me, but my son was also physically assaulted throughout the 2 weeks. And eventually I decided to accept the police help. I had previously worked with the police, and that really spun out of control, you know, going back to him and realizing he was going to change and we were going to be better. So I wanted the charges dismissed against him, but it didn't work that way. And ultimately, I ended up being arrested and convicted of a crime because I would not testify against him. So that is how I learned not to trust the police. And this is why I stayed in that cycle, was I realized the police are not going to help me. They can't protect me from him. So once I was ready to leave, and I had a great DV detective from Fairfax County who understood and helped educate me on my own relationship.
Was that Detective Melissa Wallace?
Yes,
yeah, she was on our last show. So that's great.
Detective Wallace was my assigned DV investigator, and Saray Bradshaw, Saray Heath at the time, was my victim specialist. Okay. They also had assigned me to a forensic nurse through Mount Vernon Hospital who was able to gather a lot of other evidence to use in the case, and I just followed their leads and went along with it. They got me into hiding, so I was not at risk of him or his family finding me and convincing me once again to go back to him. Eventually, I went and got a protective order, a 2-year protective order, and started with the criminal process against him.
Wow. And there's so much to your story, and we'll have to have you back to unpack some of the more details.
Sure.
But can you just tell us what the outcome was from the relationship?
Well, like I said, I did get a protective order. I never went back, never considered going back. Ultimately, he's currently serving 15 years here in Virginia for malicious wounding, and he was also convicted for another incident that happened between him and myself in Maryland, where he's serving 40 years to be consecutive to his 15 years. He was convicted there for kidnapping and second-degree assault. Is also a registered sex offender and has the longest sentence in Maryland's history for a domestic violence crime.
Wow.
So that was a lot of steps forward for domestic violence.
Wow. Well, I just thank God that you're here.
Thank you.
I mean, seriously.
Thank you.
So we are going to actually now, while you're here, I'd like you to share with our viewers, kind of put together a profile for what to look for in an abusive relationship. So this is Tenickia. I am sitting here with Amanda Tenorio, and we have put our heads together and come up with a list, a profile of an abuser. And so very briefly, we're going to just share with you what we have come to know as the profile of an abuser, and Amanda will just give some brief comments on a few of them. The first one is deceiver and liar. Amanda, what's number 2?
Flattering tongue.
Number 3 is controlling.
Number 4 would be makes you feel guilty.
Number 5, the violence starts with perceived lack of control.
Number 6, blames victim for everything, no matter what the situation is.
Number 7, keeps the chaos going.
Number 8 is full of excuses and never accepts responsibility.
Number 9, creates an environment of fear by suggesting he or she is superhuman and or above the law.
Number 10 is uses hurtful words or threats, even if it is indirectly, like to threaten suicide against themselves.
And number 11, they may follow weird philosophies.
And number 12, quickly get into a relationship.
Okay. All right, so there you have our list of common traits of an abuser. Amanda, can you just elaborate on a few of them, maybe 1 or 2 based on your situation?
When I went in, all of these apply in so many different aspects, but quick to get into a relationship, as I said, the courting barely existed and I didn't even realize. Another one was keeping the chaos going. There was always something going on, whether it was him being arrested, hospital visits, protective order hearings. And the other one that's pretty huge is creating that environment of fear. He was always getting out of trouble, charges being dismissed, so threatening me that you'll never get me in any trouble, you know, and if you do, I'll either eliminate you or I will pin a crime against you and you'll spend life in prison. And those were psychologically, those were huge threats against me.
Right, and we've talked and we've discussed that the emotional abuse is sometimes a lot, more difficult than the physical abuse, because because no one can see the emotional abuse, and words do hurt.
Yes,
Words do hurt. I know a lot of times we're taught that they don't, but
it's hard to pinpoint, and that was another thing when I reflected back on my relationship. I realized when the physical abuse was kind of minimal, my emotional abuse was torturous. It was just 100 times more, and that was a harder thing for me to overcome than those broken bones and surgeries and things like that I had to go through.
Okay. And so, Amanda, if someone, a viewer, may think they're in a relationship with an abuser, what advice would you give them?
There are many resources out there, especially here in Fairfax County. One is the Domestic Violence Action Center. I currently work there as a victim advocate, so we do options counseling, we do assessments, safety planning is huge. There's this myth going on that you have to get the police involved, and we absolutely do not encourage that unless that's what the person wants, and we talk through that on whether or not that's the safest option and what will getting the police involved do for them. But there's a host of other services that we can provide there.
Okay, well, there you have it. Thank you so much, Amanda, for being on our show.
Thank you for having me.
I'll have you back on soon.
Okay, I look forward to it.
All right.
Thank you.
Food. It nourishes, brings us together, and adds flavor to life. That's why it's important to wash hands, surfaces, and fresh produce. Keep raw meat, poultry, and seafood separate from ready-to-eat foods like fruits and vegetables. And cook to proper temperatures using a food thermometer. Enjoy! And refrigerate leftovers within 2 hours. For more tips on safely preparing foods, visit homefoodsafety.org.
Welcome back to Community Chat. I'm Tenickia Polk, your host, and today we're discussing domestic violence profiles. And most of the time we tend to focus on the profile of an abuser, but having been a domestic violence victim myself, I've come to identify a victim profile, which is equally as important to discuss. So our next guest, Miss Betty Wright, and she will help us shed some light on the difficult and sticky subject of domestic violence victim profile. Welcome, Betty.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. And just before you get started, we want to hear something about your story, but I just want to be just very clear that when we say a domestic violence victim profile, we want to be clear that it's never the victim's fault. We're not saying that, that a victim is the cause of any abuse. What we're saying is that there are some general traits of a victim that we've noticed in domestic violence cases. All right? Right?
Yeah, right.
Oh.
And it's good to say that because the person does feel like they're a victim.
Yeah.
That it's their problem.
Right. Okay, well, so please tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, I guess I'll start with the end. I was in an abusive marriage for more than 25 years. It was emotional, physical, more emotional than physical, and there was just all types of abuse that went on. I had children, so the children got involved in needing to do certain things because or they would get their dad in trouble. So that was, the whole family was involved in it, and so that was one thing that took me a long time to be able to get out of it. Okay. But you mentioned to start when I met him.
Yeah.
So when I was 19, I met him, my husband, and he was 33. So, and I had lived in West Virginia and was not that smart on a lot of things anyway. So, that was like a controller to begin with. The control first started by accusing me of doing things that it was really none of his business. He was accusing me if I went on a date, and before I was not obligated to him, but he was still accusing me.
So this is before you actually got married?
Yes.
The accusation started?
Yes.
Okay.
The accusation started very early. And we mentioned about how was the physical abuse, but it first started even, we would be driving somewhere and something didn't please him, so with a backhanded slap, I would get slapped in the face because something didn't please him. So anyway, there was sex involved, and so then after that, he told me that he was married. So, you know, that was hard to find out, because here, of course, you know, I'm the young pretty thing that he could hang on to, but he had a wife and 2 children. So, you know, I stayed around because he promised me a house. He was going to get a divorce, and he promised me a house.
Wow, so you had been dating and he was married. So this goes back to this deception that Amanda and I had discussed last segment.
Yes,
okay.
that's very, there's always deception goes with it. Isolation, she mentioned isolation because it was like keeping me from my family, and I had no one to talk about things. I didn't tell my parents because I was embarrassed to tell my parents. I was embarrassed to tell anybody. I lived in D.C. I had come from West Virginia. I lived in D.C. with a roommate, and so there was nobody to tell or running something by. Is this the right thing to be doing? And of course, I guess I needed the attention so much that whatever attention was better than none.
So how did you get out?
Well, it was a long time before I got out.
Okay.
So we go back to when I got out. Well, just had 1 child, and then the second child he wanted me to give up for adoption. So I gave a daughter up for adoption. I did not see her for 40 years, but I now have a relationship with her. But how did I get out? I finally had gotten up enough nerve to say that to talk to people. I would talk to people, and they would ask me if he was an alcoholic because of the abuse that had been. And I said, no, he didn't drink. Well, then I find out there's such a thing as a dry alcoholic, that they don't drink, but they're abusive, and the anger is there instead of the alcohol.
Wow.
So the anger, so it was not ever that an alcoholic will go to sleep sometimes and there will be peace in the family, but if he was angry, then he never stopped being angry till, you know, the weekend was over and he'd go back to work.
Okay, well, let's take a look at what we've discussed this and come up with a list of what we see as common traits of a victim of domestic violence. Okay? And so I'm just going to read them off.
Okay.
Okay, number 1 is acting out of rejection, feeling you have to prove your worth. A lot of people who experience domestic violence or victims are in a relationship because they in some way felt rejected. Number 2, they're needy for attention. Victims are needy for attention a lot of the times. Number 3 is passivity, lacking the desire to take responsibility for an area in your life. Number 4 is fearing the alternative to being in the relationship, whatever that alternative may be, whether it's going back to your parents' house or whatever. Number 5 is bitterness towards parents and or grandparents. A lot of victims are running from their parents or whatever that represents to them. Number 6, the desire to be rescued by anyone other than God. A lot of victims say that their abusers were their knight in shining armor. I certainly felt that way in my case, and I was told that. And number 7 is being secretive. Also, and you know, in your case, you're saying it came back, it had really, you know, the rejection was there from childhood.
Yes.
And then the abusive relationship is a result of the unresolved rejection from childhood. Wow, wow. All right, well, we'd love to have you back on the show again. Thank you so much for sharing your story and helping us overcome the elements of being a victim of domestic violence.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Hello, I'm Vicki McCrae, author of How to Swim with the Sharks. It's almost like the 5 stages of grief, and you just really start thinking, oh no, I'm not going to get another job, but you will, It just, when you go back into a job, you'll know what works for you, what didn't work for you in the past job, and then you can use that to move your career.
Hello and welcome back to Community Chat. My name is Tenickia Polk, your host. And in our first 2 segments, we discuss profiles of domestic violence. First, the profile of an abuser, and then the profile of a victim. However, I like to conclude today's show with discussing the profile of what I think is one of our ultimate enemies in domestic violence, and that is the spirit of self-hatred. Okay? And so the spirit of self-hatred can actually be seen in both the victim and the abuser. And the way I like to describe self-hatred is it's like a snake, whereas it turns its head and it actually eats its tail. That's exactly what the spirit of self-hatred does, is when we actually do harm to ourselves, which can actually kill ourselves in the long run. And so let's just dive in a little more and discuss the spirit of self-hatred. Here is a list of how you can identify it in your life. Self-hatred, self-rejection, self-pity, self-accusation, guilt, shame, fear of rejection, fear of man, perfectionism, rejection, victimization due to self-hatred spirits, comparisons. Now, if you agree with any of these feelings or thoughts, you're probably agreeing with a spirit of self-hatred. And I'd like to just discuss briefly some other ways for identifying self-hatred. Let's take a look at how to identify it. Some of the ways that you can identify it is through addictions, and that is, addiction simply is just looking for love and comfort anywhere outside of God. If a person frequently asks, why me? If you're constantly looking to other people to rescue you, if you have feelings of helplessness, if you're emotionally high maintenance or needy, chances are that you may be struggling with the spirit of self-hatred. And just as a bonus, I like to discuss briefly some of the physical manifestations of self-hatred. In doing so, sharing a bit of my own personal testimony. As you can see on the screen, there are 2 pictures in front of you. One is a picture of my scalp in 2009, which is inflamed with lupus discoid. The second is a picture of my scalp in 2013, totally healed from the autoimmune disease, lupus discoid. And so I've been healed from lupus discoid for 5 years now. I still am healed. And I just want to point out that At the time, before I was healed, I was taking steroid treatments that did not work. I was not on any nutritional regimen, wasn't taking any supplements, and I didn't even have anyone pray for me at that particular time. But what I did do was I learned that I was participating with the spirit of self-hatred. And I learned that that is not what God would have us to do. And so I repented and I stopped participating to the best of my ability. And suddenly I was healed. Okay, and so from that time, I've been doing some more research about it, and what I've learned is autoimmune diseases are just like self-hatred, whereas the body is actually attacking itself. And what it is it's actually a physical manifestation of what's going on spiritually. So as we attack ourselves spiritually with negative thoughts towards ourselves, self-bitterness, self-hatred, comparisons, we're actually, and a lot of the times, actually, they say 80% of the times, according to a book, A More Excellent Way by Dr. Henry Wright, those spiritual realities can have a physical manifestation in the form of disease. A lot of time when you're dealing with self-hatred, it can be, most of the time, autoimmune disease. So not only does spirit of self-hatred make us more susceptible to domestic violence relationships, but it can also have a negative impact on our health, our physical health. Okay, and so enough about the doom and gloom of self-hatred. That's not why I'm here to glorify that. But I do want to tell you now how you can actually overcome the spirit of self-hatred. There is good news, okay? And we overcome the spirit of self-hatred by three ways, okay? The first is deliverance. If you have been participating with it for a long time, you may need deliverance, and you can get instructions on deliverance on our domesticviolence.tv website. All you have to do is watch the Healthy Communities video in the Overcomer section, and it'll be very helpful for you. The second thing you may want to do is learn the truth about yourself, which is found in the Holy Bible, and confess the truth about yourself aloud. An example that we like to use in the women's group of Mount Vernon is we say, I love myself, I know I'm grand. A lot of domestic violence victims or survivors can't do that. So that's something that you want to profess and confess each day. One of my favorite scriptures is I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And then the third thing you need to do in overcoming a spirit of self-hatred is to forgive everyone. God, yourself, especially yourself, and others. Okay? And so to recap, to overcome self-hatred, we must do three things. And the first is be delivered if needed. Profess the truth about ourselves, not our opinion. Forgive yourself and everyone else. Okay, and so I guess my final thought for this show would be that this show is not an attack on the victim, nor is it an attack on the abuser, but it is an attack on the spirit of self-hatred, which is one of our ultimate enemies. Okay, and if you have been a victim of domestic violence and you're willing to try overcoming self-hatred, I welcome you to the Club of Domestic Violence Overcomers. All right, so our time is up for this show. My name is Tenickia Polk, and thank you for watching Community Chat. I hope you were educated and inspired, and if you'd like to learn more about domestic violence, visit domesticviolence.tv. If you'd like to learn more information on our featured author, visit tp-rewards.com. God bless.